What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, and today, special guest Justin Lorber is back, future Dodgers on social media. We're here to talk some prospects. Justin, how's the beginning of the season treating you?
Not too bad. I think between the Dodgers and every single affiliate, pretty sure every team is like 10 games over 500 or more. Hard to complain.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great time to be a fan of an organization where, most teams that have good farm systems, it's because you've had to live through some lean years at the major league level, as we've talked about multiple times. This is not the case with the Dodgers. They draft better than just about anyone. They develop better than just about anybody. And one of the things I want to talk, we'll just dive right into this, Justin, is some of the guys that are up at the major league level, specifically Miguel Vargas, James Outman, a couple of the quote unquote prospect graduates who are up at the major league level. We know the start Outman got off to. He slowed down a little bit. Miguel Vargas, kind of the opposite path, slow start, but seems to be picking up steam as it goes. Let's start with Vargas. This is a guy who is a top 100 prospect just about everywhere. He's no longer a prospect because he has graduated. Give me your perspective on the Vargas that the Dodgers have seen at the major league level. Anything that surprised you? Do you think there's more in there? Where are you at on what you've seen from Miguel?
I think the most surprising thing is just the fact that he's playing second base practically every day at the majors.
Yeah.
I think if you were to look back a year ago and you were to tell me that in a major league game, Miguel Vargas was playing second and Michael Busch was playing third, I would have been really surprised. But yeah, slow start. I think most people know he was dealing with the hand injury at the start of the year. But since then, he's hit really well. Weighted runs created plus is up to 112 on the year, slugging percentage up to 424. So, if the Miguel Vargas that the Dodgers have had over the last few weeks is the guy that they have for the rest of the season, and I think that's a reasonably fair expectation, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about looking at his stat line is the 227 batting average. I know kind of the league has gone away from batting average. That felt like the number that he was going to hang his hat on the most was his ability to not necessarily slug, but to get on base, which he's doing because of the walk rate. I mean, so when you look at that stat line, 227 batting, 340 on base, 424 slug, so a 765 OPS, like, do you think that's about who he's going to be, at least in his rookie season? Or do you think there's maybe some room for improvement?
I think that's fair. I mean, that's an above average OPS for a guy who is in his age 23 season. He turned 23 last fall, so he'll be 23 for the whole year. I think that's pretty fair.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly where I saw it, but this was, I think, right before he started hitting well. It was something about him having one of the higher numbers of balls hit 95 miles per hour or harder that have been outs.
Wow.
Since then, he's, probably confirmed more of those as hits. But yeah, I think 12% above league average offensively for a 23-year-old middle infielder, which again, the most surprising thing is just the fact that he's a middle infielder now. I think it's hard to really complain too much about that. And I think you can expect like some growth from that over the next couple of years. I don't think, that's something he has to be for the rest of eternity.
Yeah. Just real quick, finding the tweet you were referencing, it was from a guy at CBS Sports. He said his line could easily look better. He's recorded 7 outs on batted balls that had exit velocities of 97 or higher. 5 had launch angles between 10 and 30 degrees, and a 6th had a 31-degree launch angle. So he is slugging 667 on 95 mile an hour exit velocity balls, where the league average is 974. So just to give you a sense of his ability to, if he just gets a little bit more luck, the numbers probably look a whole lot different. Let's flip to Outman, who's in a lot of ways, the exact opposite of Miguel Vargas from this perspective. Outman was on almost none of the top 100 lists, and part of that had to do with his age. This is a guy who, for a long time, and you would know better than me as kind of the guy that's tracked a lot of these prospects over the last 4 or 5 years specifically, but Outman was a guy that most people didn't really have a ton of confidence that the bat was ever going to figure itself out. Hey, he's a plus defensive guy, some power, a lot of swing and miss, but we'll see. He changes his swing sort of, I don't want to say famously, but it's well known that he changed his swing from no longer swinging like a caveman, to use his language. Things start to turn around last year, comes up to the majors, hits a bunch of home runs, gets sent back down, and nobody really knew what to expect. He's now the favorite for the National League Rookie of the Year. The regression has come to some degree, but as we sit here and record this, he hit a grand slam the other day. Where are you at on Outman? Like, what's reasonable to expect from James Outman, seeing what we've seen?
So I think anyone expecting him like this to be kind of the baseline is probably going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality. Yeah. 145 weighted runs created plus right now. 1.6 F4 in 44 games. That is a legitimate, not just all-star player, but like key player on a championship team. And I'm not saying he can't be that, but I don't know if he's that right now. Pace wise, that's like a 5-win player. And actually, it's more than a 5-win player. That's like a 5 to 6 win player. That's just speaking statistically, that's someone who is going to be on MVP list. Maybe not winning MVPs, but a guy who appears in MVP votes. So no, I don't think that this should be like what the expectation is moving forward. But I think, like, for me, this is definitely proven any doubts that I had, coming into the season, and potentially depending on him for the center field job, that he can absolutely hold that down and be not just, an average major league hitter with a good glove, but an absolutely above average major league hitter.
I was going to ask you this question, but it just came to me, so I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Early returns. Vargas was a way better hitting prospect than Outman was. I'm curious, if you had to pick one of these two guys that you were going to place a bet on the offensive profile moving forward, sort of a career. And again, it's different approaches, because Vargas at his best is never going to be like a 35 home run guy, whereas Outman is never going to be like a 280, 290 hitter, probably. So I'm curious, like, has Outman as an offensive profile, because of what he's done at the major league level, has he surpassed Vargas from an offensive prospect perspective, do you think? Or are we jumping the gun a little bit? Is the sample size a little bit too small to make that sort of declaration?
And this is for career, not just this season. Career, I'm still going to take Vargas. Okay. And that's 2 reasons. And they're kind of intertwined. One is the age. Outman, this is his age 26 season. He just turned 26 this past week. Vargas, 2.5 years younger. This is age 23 season. James Outman, for all he's done, 33.5% strikeout rate. Miguel Vargas, 18.5% as a 23-year-old. So I see that, and I see, the same guy we saw in the minors with really good bat-to-ball skills, who grew into some more power over the last couple of years, and that's something that I think he can maintain. And at his peak, not just be, above average from like a hit tool batting average perspective, but a guy who can hit 20 or so home runs, and, potentially playing a middle infield spot at second base. That's really valuable.
Yeah, I think Outman has the worst whiff rate of anybody in Major League Baseball. I could be wrong about that, but on the flip side, he's hitting a lot of home runs, and that's kind of the profile. He's going to swing and miss a lot, and he does have a good eye, but he does hit home runs, and it's just a matter of sustainability. I think it's hard to bet on Outman because it's also new with him, that you're betting on basically rumors of a changed approach and a very small sample size at the major league level, versus a guy like Vargas that we've been hearing about the hit tool for a couple of years. And again, a small sample size where he still has, to your point, been above average. So let's move on to some of the guys who maybe aren't in the major leagues, or at least haven't been in the major leagues consistently. MLB Pipeline was the first of all the prospect lists to sort of provide an update. They update it based on the graduation of some guys who are no longer prospects, Miguel Vargas being the Dodger representative, who is no longer on top 100 lists for that reason. But the Dodgers end up with 7 guys on the top 100 list. They had 8. Vargas graduated. Those 7 are Cartaya at 14, Bobby Miller at 21, Michael Busch at 44, Gavin Stone at 46, Ryan Pepio at 57, Andy Pages at 66, and Dalton Rushing at 69. All of those players have moved up, again, mostly just because of graduations, with the exception of Cartaya. Miller is up 3 spots, Busch and Stone up 10 spots, Pepio up 13 spots, Pages up 15 spots, and Rushing, who we'll get to in a moment, up 22 spots. As you look at that, again, the order hasn't changed. It's basically just guys ahead of them no longer being on the list. Did any of those sort of particularly jump out to you? I'm not saying, oh, I think, like, oh, Busch jumps out to me and whatever, but like, we're not asking who the best prospect is on that list, but do any of those rankings jump out to you?
No, I think they're all like reasonably fair at this point. Obviously, Rushing's the guy who's taking the biggest jump, and I think deservedly so based on what he's done so far in his pro career.
So let me talk about Michael Busch real quick, because he's maybe the most interesting name to me. Having him ranked ahead of Gavin Stone, a lot of people talk about Gavin Stone and love Gavin Stone, and he's a pitcher, versus Michael Busch, who's sort of this guy without a position who can hit. Both guys have been up at the major leagues a little bit. Both guys have had, I would say, underwhelming, like, individual debuts in a very, very, very small sample size, to be clear. I think I'm still surprised when I see Michael Busch 44th. I don't feel like he gets viewed by Dodgers fans, at least, as a top 50 prospect in all of Major League Baseball. He feels like this forgotten about guy that people don't value nearly as much as Stone, who's actually 2 spots below him on a list like this.
Yeah, I mean, in most organizations, I think there's a really good shot that he'd be playing major league games right now. And in the Dodgers organization, if Miguel Vargas weren't here, I think there's a decent shot that he would be the beneficiary of a lot of those at bats. So that's just kind of where the Dodgers are, and it's better for him to be playing every day at AAA than it would be to be sitting on the bench in the majors the majority of the time, which is kind of what he did when he was up. Would have liked to see him get a few more at bats, but I mean, he can hit. Like, you can be reasonably, not certain, because you're never certain, but there's some comfortable. There's a sense of comfort there with what the floor is, that you're going to get power, you're going to get walked, like kind of like Outman. There will be some whiffs involved, but he's a good hitter, and he's playing a little more third base this year, but you throw him at second, you throw him at first. He has corner outfield experience, and you got the everyday DH now too.
Yeah. His usage at the major league level made no sense to me. They had this guy up at the major league level, and there were stretches where he played like once in a 7-day period. The Dodgers don't have anybody that can hit left-handed pitching. Michael Busch was mashing left-handed pitching, albeit at AAA. Like, they don't have anybody that they feel great about lefties that could play left field. I mean, I know he's not the most unbelievable left field. It just didn't make sense to me the way that he was being used. And so I guess I watched the way the Dodgers use him, and then I look at a list like this, and it feels like there's a disconnect. So, I mean, defensively, do you think like DH will be his primary position, probably wherever he ends up? Maybe first base, which obviously for a Dodgers, like the Dodgers, that doesn't matter because Freddie Freeman's going to be there for a while. Like, do you think he's unplayable outside of those two positions? Do you think he's well below average, but like, sure, you might be able to get by? Like, where's your defensive view of Michael Busch?
My take is most guys with respect to left field is that you can throw them out there and hope for the best. And the Dodgers have certainly tried that with a couple of guys over the last few years.
Yeah.
Like, so I wouldn't have
Kyle Schwarber level athletics, like abilities out in left field. Is it better than Kyle Schwarber in left field? Are we talking Jock Peterson in left field?
I'd put him above Schwarber. Yeah.
Okay.
Granted, he hasn't played a whole lot of left field. He played a little bit in the minors, but the majority of his corner outfield experience was in college.
Got it.
But yeah, I think you can throw him in left field. He has a lot of experience at second base in the minors. They've been playing him a little bit more at third base. I haven't seen or heard a lot about that, so I'm not going to offer much other than that. Like, probably not his best position.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to the last guy on this list, and he was one of the biggest risers in all of the list, and that's Dalton Rushing. Jumps 22 spots. He's up to number 69, up from number 91. This guy was the 40th overall pick less than a year ago, and he is now a top 70 prospect in all of Major League Baseball. And I was joking with you beforehand. We'll get into the numbers here. Like, he might still be too low based on how hard he's hitting the baseball and the numbers that he's put up in the small but getting larger sample size that we have from him. So I'll just hand you the floor. Dalton Rushing, where are you at?
I think you have to be high on him. You have to be really high on the bat with what he's done. There was a little bit of a question last year. It's like, oh, well, he's playing in low A. He played for Louisville, played in the ACC, one of the really good conferences in college baseball. Like, maybe he was just hitting the ball and seeing the ball really well. But now he goes up to high A. In 31 games, he has 7 home runs. He's walking 22% of the time. He has 1 less walk than strikeout. Weighted runs created plus of 176 in about a month and a half. And he's doing that while getting a lot of his reps at catcher. Yeah. So he's not catching every single day because Dodgers High A affiliate also has another catching prospect, Yanir Fernandez. But he's doing that as a catcher. And, the demands of that position are obviously a little different than playing outfield or playing first base. So, yeah, I think you have to be, like, if you're a Dodger fan, you have to be thrilled with getting him at the 40th overall pick last year. And less than a year out from that draft, these have been the results so far.
Yeah. I mean, and I'd have to go back. I can't imagine there's more than like 7 or 8 guys that were in that entire draft class that are currently ranked higher than him on this prospect list. That's just a guess. I might be off on that number, but it's just something to think about. You mentioned it. I mean, in 59 games between low A last year and high A this year, he has 15 home runs. So, just do the math on that. He's got 18 doubles. You said he's walked 55 times and struck out just 56 times. So it's a ridiculous pace that he is on. I mean, we're talking about, 35 home run pace with 45 doubles and a crazy walk rate and not striking out at all. The profile of that for a guy who's, to be fair, even as a college guy, is still just 22 years old, just turned 22 in February. So not particularly old for a college prospect, given where he's at in the system. And I mean, look, at some point, there's going to be a Diego Cartaya, Dalton Rushing, all these other, I mean, they got a couple other prospects that are catchers who are very good. They're going to have to figure something out with all of these guys and what they do with it. But for now, we'll just leave it at Dalton Rushing is awesome. And I'm fascinated to see one of these lists is going to just be the first list to say, screw it, we're going all in on Dalton Rushing. And there's going to be a midseason update that has him like in the 40s. And I can't wait for it. That's all I'm going to say. I can't wait I don't know if it's going to be Baseball Prospectus or Baseball America or Fangraphs, whoever it is. Kudos to you in advance. Let's get to some other prospects who might be standing out in the minors so far. I'll ask you about a couple in particular, and then I'll give you the floor at the end for guys that maybe I haven't mentioned. Let's talk about a couple pitchers at Double-A, both guys that I've seen you sort of tweet about, or at least we've talked about. Let's talk first about Emmett Sheehan. His numbers are insane. 34 innings pitched. He's got a 1.85 ERA. He has struck out 58 players in 34 innings. The other night, he had a 51% whiff rate. Feels like a matter of time before this guy's up at AAA. But give me your take and what you're hearing on Emmett Sheehan.
I think it starts with the fastball, mid to high 90s with a lot of ride, decently low slot, and it's going to generate a lot of whiffs. And that's kind of, that's the foundation here and why he's been able to do that at Double-A. I think once he goes up to AAA, which probably not too far away, I think I tweeted last night that if Gavin Stone comes up to the majors for, a decent chunk of time, he might be the guy to fill that spot. I can see the secondary stuff being challenged a little bit more. But this is, I don't think this should surprise anyone, the fact that he's been doing this, maybe how good he's doing and how impressive he's been. Yeah. But this is legitimate swing and miss stuff. And just another player from the Dodgers 2021 class who looks really good. Last year, Nick Nastrini was kind of the hot name from that class. Emmett Sheehan taken only 2 rounds after Nick Nastrini, getting a lot of love this year and deservedly so.
Yeah, a 6th round pick in 2021 that we're talking about here is wild stuff. The other name at Double-A, if it's not Sheehan that would take Gavin Stone's spot, this might be the other guy to consider. That's Landon Knack. 1.5 ERA in 29 innings for him. The whip is 0.86. This is a guy that I've always been intrigued by because when they took him, he was a senior from a small school. It was during the COVID year, so he barely pitched. I can't remember the exact numbers. He had some absurd strikeout to walk ratio where he struck out like 60 and walked 1, or I'm butchering that number, but it was ridiculous control numbers, which is kind of carried with him to some degree through the minors. He's off to a great start. He's older. He's 25 years old. Sheehan is he's in his year 23 season. So Landon Knack, I just nobody talks about this guy, and maybe maybe nobody should be talking about him as like a major league like legitimate prospect, but he just keeps producing, and I wonder if he's one of these guys who could sneak his way into the majors as a spot starter by the end of the year, just because he's a little bit older, even though he's still at AA. So am I crazy on any of that with Landon Knack?
No, you're not crazy. I think part of the reason he gets less attention is he doesn't have the kind of strikeout rates that an Emmett Sheehan or a Nick Nastrini. He doesn't have the kind of, like the pure stuff of a Bobby Miller. But it's not like this stuff is lacking. And just for context, last year he dealt with some injury issues. By the end of the year, the velocity was fluctuating. I think there was one start where it was down to kind of the low 90s, which was concerning, especially for a guy who's a little bit older as a prospect. But this year seems to be healthy. The velocity is back in the mid 90s. I've heard good things about the slider, and he's pitched really well. So like Sheehan, wouldn't be a surprise to see him up at AAA, filling that Gavin Stone spot, assuming Stone comes up and takes May's spot in the major league rotation for a decent chunk of time.
Okay, a couple more names. This is one you tweeted about. I was unfamiliar with, but people seem to be getting pretty excited about. A guy by the name of Peyton Martin. He's an 18-year-old. He was a 17th round pick. Was it last year, 2022 or 2021?
Last year.
So, I mean, normally we're not talking about 18-year-old 17th round picks a year after they were drafted, but what makes this guy so unique and so special?
I mean, it's a credit to him, and it's a credit to the Dodgers scouting, because this is a 17-year-old who was committed to Eastern Carolina, drafted in the 17th round, signed for up to the maximum bonus that you can sign as a day 3 pick, which is $125,000 without going over slot. And he impressed last year in the fall at Dodgers Instructs. He got assigned right out of the gate to low A, which is not something the Dodgers always do with their high school pitching prospects. And he's been really good. Mid 90s fastball, really good curveball, and the athleticism has been impressive. Overall, like this is a guy who I don't think should be treated just like a 17th round pick who's had a hot start. Someone who I think should be viewed, kind of as like a day 2 high school arm right now. And for context, day 2 of the draft is rounds 2 to 10.
Yeah. Crazy. Okay. Another name that in some ways is similar, not a guy who was on a ton of people's radars. And then all of a sudden now this guy is on everyone's radar. I'm not entirely positive how to pronounce his first name. It might be Jose. It might be Josue. It might be Josue. There's a lot of, it's De Paula is his last name. So we'll go with that. That seems like a pretty straightforward guess here. This is a young kid who's a hitter who, when I've talked in the past to prospect people who talk to other prospect people, this is the guy that like people seem to get giddy when they talk about, because the ceiling on this prospect seems like it's about, I mean, maybe the highest of anybody in the entire Dodgers system.
Yeah. I mean, when Yordan Alvarez comps are getting thrown around, and just for the record, I'm not doing that because not that it's incorrect, but that's a lot to put on a kid who's 17 and who has not played an official game yet in the States.
Yeah.
But he's mashed. If you look at, and if you're going to scout the stat line, the place you don't want to do it is the Dominican Summer League. But if you look at the stat line last year, very impressive. Back to ball skills, the power, the exit velocity. Defensively, like that's not going to be his calling card, but offensively, super, super high ceiling. Like you said, someone who I imagine will get a lot of attention if he performs well in the Arizona Summer League, and someone who should keep rising, assuming, he delivers on some of this hype that has been flowing around over the last 6 months or so.
Yeah. Okay. One last pair of prospects that I want to ask you about that have some major league implications. We know the Dodgers' inability to hit left-handed pitching at the major league level. We know that there is probably a need in the outfield, depending on what you think about Trace Thompson, depending on what you think about Jason Hayward, who has been slumping lately. One of the questions we get a lot is about Andy Pages and Johnny DeLuca, two guys who are on the 40-man roster who were just recently promoted from AA to AAA. Do either of these guys have I've been telling people, hey, pump the brakes. I don't think you're going to see either of these guys at the major league level. Maybe DeLuca because he's a college guy. Go Ducks. So maybe like a little bit older prospect moves a little bit quicker, whereas Pages seems like the variabilities. I mean, like for you, do you think either of these guys could make an impact, or are we looking at 2024 for both of them?
Could, sure, but I think you're right in that 2024 is more likely the impact year. They both just got promoted up to AAA this week, and Andy Pages just went on the injured list as soon as he was promoted. So his timeline, depending on how long that is, might be even further pushed back. I think if you see one, I think you're right. It's probably DeLuca. DeLuca also has a little bit more flexibility on where you can play him in the outfield, all three outfield positions. But I think in terms of filling a corner outfield need for this year, which seems like one of the Dodgers' two offensive needs in addition to shortstop, probably better served by doing that through the trade market than they would by one of those two guys. Although, look, if they're at AAA and they mash, they're both already on the 40-man roster, so you don't need to add a new spot for them. Who knows?
Yeah, Justin, you're forgetting this is a Mookie Betts should be our everyday shortstop show. I'm not saying you have to agree with that, but the DodgerHeads stance is that the Dodgers don't need to go out and sign a shortstop because they've already got a guy that's playing as good of defense as Trey Turner played there and is as good, if not better, of an offensive player than Trey Turner is. So we got a $350 million shortstop already on the roster, Justin. We're good.
The thing is, I don't disagree, but then you need two outfielders, arguably.
But those are a lot easier to go find. Finding a right fielder who can hit is a heck of a lot cheaper than finding a shortstop who can hit.
You're right. And I think that, look, there are internal conversations going on there that I'm certainly not privy to, but I don't hate the idea of Mookie Betts as a shortstop. I know it's joked about often, on Twitter and whatever, but from what I've seen, which is not a lot generally, it seems like he's been fine there.
Yeah. I mean, I jokingly said it originally when I asked. I was like, okay, which offensive player would you prefer, Trey Turner or Mookie Betts? And I think most people would say, just from a strictly offensive plate, that Mookie Betts, they would take the offensive profile of Mookie Betts over Trey Turner. And then I said, if we're being fair, how big of a gap defensively is there between Trey Turner at shortstop and Mookie Betts at shortstop? And I would say it's a small gap offensively, but Mookie gets the edge. And I'll be fair. I'll play cautiously and say it's a small gap to Trey Turner defensively, and I'll give him the edge. But like my point is, whatever you think Trey Turner was worth as a shortstop, I don't know if there's a massive difference between the value he provides you at that position as a total package than Mookie Betts. And if Trey Turner was on this team, nobody would be saying we need to go. They'd be saying, great, we feel good about our shortstop. So I don't think the Dodgers are just going to pencil Mookie Betts in for all of eternity. But I'm not saying it's a bad idea either.
No, I think that, depending on what happens at the trade deadline and whether Miguel Rojas or Chris Taylor start to hit better, there could be a reasonable argument that by the time you get to the playoffs, that your best lineup includes Mookie Betts at shortstop and three other guys in the outfield.
Yeah.
I think that's something that could be feasible down the line.
Totally. All right. Before we close here, is there any other guys in the system that we haven't mentioned? I mean, I know you haven't done all your homework yet. You're not totally dialed in. It's early in the season. But I know there are usually guys that you keep an eye on, and you're following the right people on Twitter and hearing things. So any other prospects that we haven't mentioned yet that are worth sort of just putting the pebble in the shoe to keep an eye
on? So we mentioned two of the current AA rotation guys. The rest of the rotation deserves a mention as well. Kyle Hurt, Nick Frasso, River Ryan. Tulsa's pitching as a whole has been just really, really good. And those guys especially have all been good. Justin Robleski, who's a lefty starter, currently in high A, was the Dodgers' 11th round pick in 2021. Yeah, that's right. Same round as River Ryan, for what it's worth. Both of those guys look like legit pitching prospects, which to me, just to have two guys come out of day 3 and 2 years later have them both be legit pitching prospects. Pretty impressive, especially given River Ryan was generously handed over by the Padres in the Matt Beatty DFA trade.
It's amazing.
And I'll give one more shout out to Jared Karros, son of Eric Karros, first pro experience this year in single A, has done pretty well. Wouldn't be surprised to see him up at high A at some point this year as well.
Okay. And real quick, a guy we've mentioned sort of in passing, Nick Nastrini. Do you think he's a guy who's in that conversation of could be seen at the major league level yet, or do you think we're still a little ways away?
That's a good catch. He's also in the double A rotation, but he started the year on the injured list, so he hasn't had as many starts as some of the other guys. I think he's less likely.
Okay.
He is not on the 40-man. He, as the 2021 draftee, doesn't need to be added to the 40-man until the end of 2024.
Okay.
So I think, talent-wise, he's up there with, the guys that could be. Roster logistics-wise, it might be, I wouldn't be surprised to see, Landon Knack given a first crack, given that he's Rule 5 eligible this offseason versus Sheehan and Nastrini, who are eligible after 2024 season.
Yeah. Yeah. And with guys like Grove and Pepio still on the 40-man. And, I know Grove recently added back to the taxi squad, even though he hasn't gone on a rehab assignment. And Pepio, the bad news, unfortunately, is I believe just recently it came out that he probably won't be pitching until after the All-Star break, at least at the major league level. So they've got some numbers there, even if at times it doesn't feel like the starting pitching is something you feel great about. It also isn't like they've got 5 or 6 guys on a list that you wouldn't hate to see making starts for the Dodgers there as well. So, well, hey, Justin, we appreciate it as always. Love your insight into this team and into the farm system and to some of the young guys. So if you're unfamiliar, please give Justin a follow at Future Dodgers on Twitter. Tons of great content. At some point, he'll be updating his list in the next few months, in the upcoming few months, depending on the time. I usually you do a midseason. I guess I shouldn't pencil you into this, that you're committed to doing a midseason update, but I'm sure there'll be some content.
It is penciled in.
Okay.
Some point after the draft, there will be an update.
Okay. And speaking of the draft, not too far away. Usually we have you on for a little bit of analysis of whoever the Dodgers pick up. So again, Justin's a great person to follow. You can follow him at Future Dodgers on Twitter. Justin, we always appreciate the time. Thanks to everybody for watching. As always, please subscribe, ring the notification bell here. If you're checking this out via podcast, you can search for DodgerHeads on Google, Spotify, Apple. Please follow, rate, review. We'd greatly appreciate that. Enjoy the rest of your day. And as always, go Dodgers.